Part 1. The Signal and the Stone. Chapter 1. The Summons. Dr. Eris Thorne believed in rock. He believed in the elegant, brutal certainty of tectonics, the slow, patient poetry of sedimentation, and the quantifiable truth of seismic waves. Rock was his scripture. It was honest. It didn't lie, it didn't posture, and it certainly didn't harbor UFOs, which was why he was sitting in a leatherback chair that cost more than his ghosts were haunting, subdivided it, and sold it at a 300% profit. Dr. Thorne Fugel began his voice a smooth, confident baritone that had likely closed 1,000 deals. "Thank you for coming. I'll be direct. We have a geological problem." Eris nodded, his fingers steepled. He'd been headhunted for this consultancy by a third party, the details kept deliberately vague. All he knew was that it involved anomalous, ground-penetrating radar data from a private property in the Uinta Basin. For the fee they were offering, they could have told him they were drilling for unicorn bones, and he would have at least shown up with his gravimeter. "That's my specialty," Eris said, his own voice a dry counterpoint to Fugel's polish. "Problematic geology." Fugel allowed a small smile. "This is uniquely problematic. We're investigating a property known as Skinwalker Ranch." Eris kept his expression neutral, but inside a small, cynical alarm bell began to ring. He knew the name. Every geologist, physicist, and atmospheric scientist in the western United States knew the name. It was a nexus of crackpot theories, a Super Bowl of pseudoscience, tales of cattle mutilations, interdimensional portals, and glowing orbs. It was the kind of place you talked about after 4 beers at a conference, a punchline with a zip code. "I'm aware of its reputation," Eris said carefully. "Forget the reputation," Fugel said, leaning forward, the intensity in his eyes ratcheting up a notch. "I'm interested in data. Verifiable, repeatable data. Last year, we conducted a directional drilling operation into the side of a large rock formation on the property of Mesa. We expected to hit sedimentary layers, shale sandstone, the usual. And you didn't." "Oh, we did. For about 100 feet. Then we hit something else. Something our drill, a state-of-the-art piece of equipment designed to cut through solid rock, could not penetrate. We tried to steer it upwards around the obstruction. It wouldn't budge. The drill bits came back unusual." He slid a tablet across the vast mahogany desk. On the screen was a microscopic image of metal shavings. Eris leaned in. The crystalline structure was bizarre, a chaotic matrix of elements. His brow furrowed. He recognized tellurium, a rare metalloid, and europium, a lanthanide you didn't just find lying around in a Utah rock formation, mixed with iron, titanium, and aluminum in strange non-terrestrial ratios. The analysis suggests, Fugel continued, that the material composition is analogous to the thermal shielding tiles on the space shuttle. It's an artificially manufactured alloy, Dr. Thorne, and it appears to be part of a dome-shaped structure approximately 400 feet long, buried inside a billion-year-old mesa. Eris sat back, the cynical alarm bell now drowned out by a roaring siren of sheer, unadulterated scientific curiosity. This wasn't about UFOs. This was about geology. Impossible, absurd, paradigm-shifting geology. "You have my attention," Eris said. "That's not all," Fugel said. "We've had other issues. We brought in a team to conduct a new survey with advanced ground-penetrating radar. The data was almost entirely corrupted by a powerful, localized radio frequency interference, an interference that disappears the moment the equipment leaves the property line. We believe the two phenomena are connected. The object in the mesa and the energy field around it." He looked Eris directly in the eye. "I'm not asking you to believe in aliens, Doctor. I'm asking you to look at my data and tell me what in the hell is buried in my rock." Eris Thorne believed in rock, and this rock was screaming. Chapter 2. The Island of Weird. The drive out to the ranch was a journey through geological time. The gleaming towers of Salt Lake City gave way to the rugged Wasatch Mountains, then flattened into the sprawling, desolate beauty of the Uinta Basin. It was a land of stark contrasts, where verdant river valleys cut through arid plains, and mesas rose like ancient sleeping beasts against a sky of impossible blue. To Eris, it was a textbook come to life, a place where the earth showed its bones. He was met at the gate by a man who looked as though he'd been carved from the very landscape. Thomas Winterton, the ranch superintendent, had the steady gaze and calloused hands of a man who understood the world through a more practical lens than Eris ever would. His handshake was like a geological event in itself. Dr. Thorne Thomas said, his voice a low rumble. "Welcome. Try not to let the place get to you." "I'm here for the rocks, Mr. Winterton," Eris replied. "They tend to be less troublesome than people." Thomas chuckled a dry, rasping sound. "On this ranch, you might find the rocks have more personality than you'd like." He led Aris to the command center, a repurposed ranch house buzzing with an improbable amount of high-tech equipment. Banks of monitors displayed everything from security camera feeds to real-time spectral analysis. It was less of a farmhouse and more of a terrestrial mission control. Inside, he met the rest of the core team, Dr. Travis Taylor, an astrophysicist with a PhD in optical science and a mind that seemed to operate on a different frequency from most mortals. He greeted Aris with a whirlwind of enthusiastic questions about seismic refraction and the piezoelectric properties of quartz, his eyes alight with a fierce boyish curiosity. He was the team's brilliant, untethered eyed. In stark contrast was Eric Bard, the principal investigator, a man of quiet intensity who seemed most comfortable communicating with the universe through his array of sensors. He watched the world through the waterfall displays of his spectrum analyzers, searching for patterns in the static. He was the team's stoic, data-driven superego. "We call it the Island of Weird," Travis explained, gesturing to a large topographical map of the 512-acre property. Everything outside the property line, normal. The Uinta Basin, predictable physics. But inside this fence, the laws of nature seem to get a little flexible. Ascribing paranormal explanations to phenomena you can't yet explain is a failure of scientific rigor. Dr. Taylor Aris said, unable to help himself. It was a reflex. Travis grinned, unfazed. "Oh, I agree. That's why we're here. To apply rigor to the seemingly impossible. We've recorded radiation spikes, magnetic fluctuations, and that persistent 1.6 gigahertz radio signal that seems to pop up whenever we start poking the hive." The hive? The ranch Thomas clarified his expression grim. It doesn't always like being poked. Their first stop was the mesa itself. It was a formidable wall of reddish-brown rock, its face littered with massive boulders that had calved off over millennia. A makeshift road led to a cleared area at its base, the site of the previous year's drilling operation. "X marks the spot," Thomas said, pointing to a capped borehole pipe. "That's where we hit it." Aris ran his hand over the rough face of the mesa. He could see the layers of history, the patient work of eons. To think that something artificial, something vast and metallic, was nestled deep inside that ancient stone felt like a violation of first principles. "We've invited the GPR expert back," Eric said. "A man named Jan Frank. He's a genius, builds his own systems. He's bringing a new, more powerful unit designed for deep penetration and a portable one we can carry right up the rock face." Aris nodded. "Good, I want to see this interference for myself. If there's a signal, it has a source. If it has a source, we can triangulate it. It's just physics." Travis clapped him on the shoulder. "Famous last words on Skinwalker Ranch, my friend. Welcome to the laboratory." Chapter 3, The Ghost in the Machine. Jan Frank was a craftsman of the invisible. A tall, lanky man with the quiet focus of a watchmaker, he treated his ground-penetrating radar systems less like scientific instruments and more like musical ones. He had built them by hand, knew their every quirk, and could read their output like a maestro reading a score. He arrived with 2 custom rigs. One was a strange serpentine device designed to be dragged across the ground, its low-frequency antenna promising to peel back the layers of the mesa to unprecedented depths. The other was a marvel of miniaturization, a lightweight GPR unit mounted on a harness that looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. "This one," Jan said, "padding the harness is for you, Thomas. We can get you right up on that rock face over the drill site. It's fiberglass, no carbon fiber, as little metal as possible." "What are you hoping to find?" Aris asked, circling the equipment, his professional skepticism warring with his gearhead instincts. "Voids, first and foremost," Jan explained. "Caves, tunnels, local legends are full of them. But metal is a perfect target for radar. It reflects almost 100% of the signal. If there's something metallic down there, it'll light up like a Christmas tree." They set up a base of operations near the mesa. Eric deployed his full suite of sensors, Geiger counters, magnetometers, and his trusty spectrum analyzer, the SDR, its antenna, pointed like a cannon at the silent rock face. Aris placed a series of his own portable geophones around the site, hoping to catch any subterranean vibrations. Travis, meanwhile, was like a kid in a candy store, peppering Jan with questions about antenna design and signal processing. "What's your center frequency on the deep rig? Are you pulse modulated or continuous wave?" Jan smiled patiently. "Let's just get it turned on first." He powered up the portable unit that Thomas was preparing to wear. The small receiver on the device connected via a local Wi-Fi hotspot to Jan's phone, which displayed the data stream. "Okay, transmitter and receiver are working," Jan said, tapping his phone, "and you are good to go." Almost immediately, something was wrong. "Are you guys transmitting something?" Jan asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. He held up his phone. The clean, predictable waveform that should have been scrolling across the screen was a chaotic, jagged mess. It looked like a seismograph during a magnitude 9 earthquake. "No," Eric said, looking up from his own monitors. "We're completely passive." Travis Harris asked, arching an eyebrow. "Not me," Travis said, holding up his hands. "I'm just a humble observer." "What the hell?" Jan muttered, walking away from the truck, holding his phone up as if testing for a cell signal. "I've never seen this before. It's completely overwhelming the system." He looked at Thomas. "You got a phone on you." Thomas pulled his phone from his pocket and turned it off. The jagged waveform on Jan's screen didn't flinch. For a brief, tantalizing second, it settled into a normal pattern, then immediately devolved back into screaming chaos. "It's freaking out," Jan said, baffled. "I tested it this morning in town. It was perfect. I've used this exact unit in mines 1,000 feet underground next to massive electrical generators and never seen interference like this." Harris moved over to stand next to Eric. "What have you got?" "Nothing," Eric said, his voice tight with frustration. "The spectrum is clear except for the usual background noise. Whatever's hitting his machine is either at a frequency I'm not monitoring or it's not a standard radio wave. Maybe a complex magnetic pulse. Or," Travis chimed, in a speculative gleam in his eye, "the signal is coming from the ground." Jan shook his head, a look of profound disbelief on his face. "This is strange. I don't know what to do. I think we just have to run with it and hope the post-processing filters can clean it up." "What about your other system?" Harris asked. "The deep penetration rig." "Let's find out," Jan said, a new resolve in his voice. He and a younger member of the team, Caleb, unspooled the long, snake-like antenna and began the laborious process of dragging it in a straight line across the top of the mesa. Meanwhile, Thomas, looking like a futuristic mountaineer, began his slow, careful ascent of the rock face below the malfunctioning GPR on his back, beeping erratically. Harris stood with Eric and Travis watching the two-pronged assault on the mesa's secrets. He felt a prickle of unease. His scientific mind searched for a rational explanation. A localized, naturally occurring maser effect, some bizarre interaction between the area's magnetic field and a unique mineral vein, but the fact that it only affected Jan's specific equipment and only here was deeply unsettling. It wasn't a ghost in the machine. It felt more like the machine had been brought into the ghost domain and the ghost was not pleased. Chapter 4. The Unreadable Page. The next day, the command center was thick with anticipation. Jan Frank, looking like a man who hadn't slept, had spent the night battling the corrupted data, wrestling with sophisticated algorithms to filter out the noise that had plagued their survey. I have to be honest with you, Jan began his image projected onto the main screen from his hotel room. The data from the portable unit Thomas wore is a mess. The interference was overwhelming. It's almost unusable. A collective sigh went through the room. "Almost Brandon Fugel," asked his voice sharp. "I was able to recover about 10% of it," Jan admitted. "It's like trying to read a page of a book that's been soaked in water and torn to shreds. You can make out a few words, a few shapes, but the full sentences are lost." He brought up an image on the screen. It was a chaotic, checkered pattern of static. Harris leaned forward, his eyes scanning the digital noise. A good GPR scan should look like a cross-section of a layered cake. This looked like a Jackson Pollock painting. "The interference signal itself is the story here," Harris mused aloud. "It's not random noise, it's structure. We need to analyze the waveform of the interference itself." "I agree," Eric said. "But the fact that it only appears when Jan's GPR is active, and only on this property, it suggests an interactive intelligence. It's reacting to us." "Or it's a resonance effect," Harris countered, unwilling to make that leap. "His GPR emits a pulse at a specific frequency. Something in the ground could be resonating with that frequency and emitting a harmonic signal that floods his receiver, like a tuning fork." A 400-foot-long, metallic dome-shaped tuning fork, Travis asked, his grin wide. Even in the 10% of recoverable data, Jan continued zooming in on a small section of the image. We see things. GPR looks for hyperbolic shapes, little horseshoes. These indicate a reflection from a discrete object, a rock, a pipe, a void, and in this mess, he highlighted several faint curved shapes. There are dozens of them. They're scattered everywhere just behind the rock face where you drilled. These aren't just rock. The data, what little there is, suggests a whole series of distinct anomalies. Harris stared at the screen. It was like looking at a star chart through a cloudy night. You could see the hints of constellations, the promise of something more, but the full picture was maddeningly obscured. A series of objects, or perhaps tunnels, just feet from where they had been drilling. But this isn't the main event, Jan said, his tone shifting. Let's look at the data from the deep penetrating radar, the one we dragged across the top of the mesa. The image changed. This was cleaner. It showed a clear cross-section of the mesa's top layer. Eris could see the soil, the weathered rock, the bedrock. It was a beautiful, readable page. Jan began to scroll through the data, moving the virtual cross-section along the path they had walked. We scanned about a 300-meter line, Jan narrated. It's all very standard geology. Consistent layers, some fractures, exactly what you'd expect to see. It's all fine until you get to here. He stopped scrolling. On the screen, a new feature appeared, and it was so jarring, so profoundly out of place that a stunned silence fell over the room. Stretching down from just below the surface was a massive, vertically oriented anomaly. It was a solid, highly reflective column that plunged deep into the heart of the mesa. It was perfectly cylindrical, a stark, artificial shape in the midst of chaotic nature. "Hello," Travis whispered, his voice full of awe. "Look at that," Thomas breathed. Eris felt the blood drain from his face. He stood up and walked closer to the screen, his mind racing through every possible geological explanation and finding every one of them wanting. It wasn't a volcanic pipe, the shape was too uniform. It wasn't a sinkhole filled with water, the reflectivity was too high. It wasn't a mineral vein, it was too geometrically perfect. "What are its dimensions?" Eris asked, his voice strained. "It's about 6 or 7 meters across," Jan said. 20, maybe 25 feet wide. It starts just a few meters below the surface, and it extends down, well, it extends past the range of my radar. We're tracking it down to at least 40 meters, about 120 feet deep, but it likely goes deeper. It's essentially as tall as the visible portion of the mesa. He moved the cursor. And here's the kicker. See its location on the map. It's directly adjacent to your original drill site, right behind the dome. They were looking at a pillar. A perfect, massive, 100-foot tall, 20-foot wide pillar made of something so dense it reflected radar like a mirror buried inside a mountain standing right next to a metallic dome the size of a football field. Eris felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. He had come here for the rocks. He had come to solve a geological puzzle. But this wasn't geology. This was architecture. "We have to get in there," Thomas said, his voice low and intense. "We know exactly where it is now. We can move those boulders. We can drill right into it. I can have a crane company lined up by the end of the day." He continued, his practical mind already shifting into gear. "A big one. We'll need to build a pad, clear a path, but we can do it." Eris looked from the impossible image on the screen to the determined faces of the men in the room. His skepticism, the bedrock of his entire professional life, had been fractured. The rock he believed in, the honest, predictable stone, had just shown him something that had no right to be there. Yes, Eris found himself saying the word, feeling strange in his mouth. Yes, we do. Part 2. The Eye in the Sky. Chapter 5. Moving Mountains. The arrival of the excavators was a declaration of war against inertia. Their diesel engines growled a jarring modern sound against the ancient silence of the valley. Under Thomas Winterton's expert direction, they began to carve a path to the mesa, moving tons of earth to build a temporary bridge over the irrigation canal that separated the access road from the field. Eris watched the process with a mixture of professional admiration and philosophical unease. They were altering the landscape, imposing their will on a place that seemed to possess a will of its own. He had set up his geophones in a wider array, hoping to detect any seismic response to the excavation. So far, there was only the rhythmic thud of the machinery. "It's the biggest thing we've ever done here," Thomas said, standing beside Eris as a massive yellow machine laid a huge metal culvert into the canal bed. In the Bigelow days, they were mostly observational. "We're interventionalists." The word hung in the air. Intervention. It implied an action taken to improve a situation, but here it felt more like poking a slumbering leviathan. While the groundwork was being laid for what they were now calling the Mesa Project, the team's focus shifted. You couldn't just drill into a mountain on a whim. It took days of preparation, logistics, and heavy machinery. In the interim, the ranch's other great mystery beckoned the triangle. It was a patch of land at the heart of the property, unremarkable to the naked eye, where the highest concentration of strange phenomena had been recorded. UAP sightings, equipment, malfunctions, GPS signals going haywire. The team had previously identified an anomalous zone in the airspace directly above it, a column of something that seemed to stretch from about 300 feet up to 5,000 feet. "Since we're waiting for the crane, we have an opportunity," Travis announced that evening in the command center. "I've invited a specialist to come out, a man named Burdett Anderson." He works with Photron high-speed cameras. We're talking 1,000 frames per second, or 100,000 if we need it. What for Eris asked, looking up from a geological map of the basin. We're going to launch rockets into the anomaly, Travis said, as if this were the most normal suggestion in the world. And we're going to film what happens in super slow motion. Eris sighed. You want to shoot fireworks at a ghost? We've seen rockets veer off course in that exact spot. Travis countered, his enthusiasm undiminished. We've had drones drop out of the sky. Something is up there. Our eyes are too slow to see it. A high-speed camera isn't. It slows down reality. If there's a UAP, a plasma ball, a momentary portal, this camera will catch it. Burdett Anderson turned out to be as specialized as his equipment. He spoke in a lexicon of shutter speeds and sensor arrays, his passion for capturing fleeting moments palpable. He set up 2 cameras on heavy tripods, aiming them at the sky above the triangle. One was a standard color camera, the other an infrared unit capable of seeing heat signatures in the dark. The plan is simple, Travis explained as they stood in the cool night air of the triangle. The cameras aimed the rocket launch pad ready. We launch. Burdett records. Eric monitors the spectrum from the command center. We see what we see. The first rocket, a simple model rocket with a bright red streamer, shot upwards with a satisfying fizz. It climbed straight and true for about 200 feet, then suddenly it wobbled, veering sharply to the left as if it had hit an invisible wall of wind. Did you see that? Travis exclaimed. It turned right before it hit the anomaly zone? Could have been a wind shear, Eris offered, though the air around them was perfectly still. Let's go again, Thomas said, already prepping a second rocket. The second rocket launched perfectly. It ascended high into the night sky, a beautiful glittering arc against the stars. As its embers faded, a new light appeared, where Caleb, the young security officer, shouted, pointing. Right there above the ridge, Eris's head snapped up. It was a bright orange light moving steadily from southwest to northeast. It was far too slow and bright for a meteor, and it wasn't blinking like an airplane. That's not a plane, Thomas said, his voice hushed. Eric, you seeing this orange light, treetop height moving fast? Copy Eric's voice crackled over the radio. Checking cameras, checking ADS-B. The Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast System was a transponder network that tracked all commercial and most private aircraft. If it was a plane or helicopter, it should be on Eric's map. The light continued its silent, inexorable path. Then it did something impossible. It made a sudden, non-ballistic 45-degree turn to the north and accelerated dramatically. Eris felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He had spent countless nights under the stars, mapping constellations, tracking satellites. He knew the sky. Airplanes don't do that. Satellites don't do that. Nothing he knew of did that. Did you see that turn? Travis yelled. It just turned. Eric, anything on ADS-B, Thomas demanded. Negative, came the reply. The sky above you is completely clear. I've got planes 100 miles south, but nothing over you. Nothing. The lights sped across the sky above them, still impossibly bright then. As if a switch had been flicked, it vanished. It didn't fade out. It just ceased to exist. Silence. Well, Eris said, his voice hoarse. That was anomalous. Let's launch the third rocket, Travis said, his voice trembling with excitement. Let's see if we can get it to come back. They prepped the final rocket. The countdown began. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The rocket ignited, leaped off the pad and climbed. 30, maybe 40 feet into the air, there was a brilliant flash, a loud pop, and the rocket tumbled back to Earth, its motor clearly blown, trailing smoke and fire. Malfunction, Thomas yelled, grabbing a fire extinguisher. It blew up. Holy crap, Travis breathed. What would cause that? I've never seen a motor do that. Travis, we caught it. Burdett's voice was tight strained. We caught the malfunction on the high speed. But there's something else. Something on the camera. You need to see this. They crowded around the small monitor on Burdett's camera. He played the footage back frame by agonizing frame. As the rocket began to launch, the dark sky in the frame was empty. But as the bright flare of the motor illuminated the scene, a shape became visible in the air directly in the rocket's path. It was a dark, amorphous, cloud-like blob, shimmering at the edges, hanging silently in the air about 40 feet up. It hadn't been visible a millisecond before. There's not a cloud in the sky, Thomas whispered. They watched mesmerized as the digital representation of the rocket ascended. It flew directly towards the center of the blob. The moment it made contact, the screen filled with the white flash of the explosion. Burdett rewound and played it again. The blob was there, the rocket approached, it hit the blob, boom. Oh my God, Travis said, his voice barely a whisper. We're not looking at an empty space. There is literally something there. We may be looking at the anomaly for the first time. Aris felt a profound intellectual chill that had nothing to do with the night air. He was a man of rock, of tangible things, of measurable forces. But he had just seen a video of a rocket being destroyed by a cloud that materialized out of thin air. Before anyone could process the monumental implications of what they had just seen, a new sound intruded, a low, rhythmic whump, whump, whump that grew steadily louder. Helicopter Caleb said, looking up, "Coming in fast. No lights." Within seconds, a large, dark silhouette passed directly overhead, a military-style helicopter flying low and fast. "Eric, you got that," Travis shouted into his radio. "Negative nothing on ADS-B. That aircraft is not transponding." The helicopter banked circling the ranch, once a silent, menacing observer in the dark. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it sped off to the southeast and vanished into the night. They stood in stunned silence, the smell of burnt rocket fuel mingling with the sagebrush on the night air. They had come out to shoot fireworks at a ghost, and it seemed they had not only hit it, but they had also attracted the attention of something far more terrestrial and perhaps far more dangerous. The Island of Weird was living up to its name. Part 3, The Dragon's Fury. Chapter 6, Ampere's Calculated Risk. The revelation of the sky blob and the subsequent military flyover sent a shockwave through the team. The footage was analyzed, reanalyzed, and scrutinized from every conceivable angle. Aris, Eric, and Travis spent an entire day locked in the command center debating its nature. "It's a plasma phenomenon," Travis theorized, pacing excitedly. "A localized ball of ionized gas held together by a magnetic field. The rocket's metallic components disrupted the field, causing it to discharge its energy. The energy required to do that would be immense." Eric countered, staring at the screen. "It would have lit up my entire spectrum. But I got nothing until the motor exploded." "It's a lens flare. An internal reflection in the camera," Aris argued, clinging to the last vestiges of conventional physics. "The sudden bright light of the motor caused an artifact. Then why did it stay in the same position relative to the ground as the camera panned up?" Burdett, who had joined them via video call, pointed out. "A lens flare moves with the camera. This blob was a stationary object in the sky. And another thing, I went back through the frames just before the explosion." He shared his screen. It was a single frame captured a millisecond before the main flash. To the left of the rocket's plume, just above the dark silhouette of the mesa, was a brilliant star-like point of light. "That light appears for exactly one frame, 1/1000th of a second," Burdett said, "and it's not a reflection." They were pieces of an incomplete puzzle, each one more bizarre than the last. A 40-foot-high invisible anomaly, a 1 millisecond flash of light, and a rocket that detonates at the exact same altitude, 31 feet, as a much larger rocket that had exploded the previous year. The coincidences were piling up to a statistically impossible height. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Brandon Fugel. With him was an imposing, sharp-featured man in a dark suit, Sean Reyes, the Attorney General for the state of Utah. The team briefed them, playing the high-speed footage and the security camera video of the black helicopter. Reyes listened intently, his expression unreadable. When the audio of the helicopter played, he leaned forward. "Play that again," he said. They did. "That's a Black Hawk," he stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "I've been around military aviation. That's the sound of a UH-60. And it wasn't transponding," Eric added, "which is highly illegal for any aircraft in civilian airspace." "Unless you're military conducting a classified operation," Reyes finished, his eyes narrowing. "Brandon, we have a serious issue here. This is a violation of state sovereignty. I will make some inquiries." He turned to the team. "Your work here is clearly attracting attention. Be careful." The Attorney General's visit solidified a shift in Aris's thinking. The world of amorphous sky blobs and strange lights was deeply uncomfortable, a place without rules. But a secret military helicopter, that was a world of human agency, of cover-ups and black-budget projects. It was a theory he could get his teeth into. Perhaps Skinwalker Ranch wasn't haunted, perhaps it was being used. With the prep work at the mesa nearing completion, the colossal 175-ton crane arrived its journey across the newly made culvert bridge, a slow, ponderous spectacle. Its outriggers extended, planting it firmly on the pad Thomas's team had meticulously leveled. The stage was set for the next act. While they move the boulders, we'll be monitoring everything Eric announced at the pre-op briefing. Travis and I will be at a safe distance with the spectrum analyzer and other sensors. Aris, your geophones are in place. Let's see if disturbing the front door gets a response from whatever's inside. Eris felt a familiar thrill of anticipation, the pure excitement of a new experiment. Whatever the explanation, alien military or some unknown natural force, they were about to get a reaction. They were about to poke the hive with a very, very big stick. Chapter 7, The Unseen Hand. The crane operator, a seasoned professional named Alan, went through his pre-lift checks, the cab of his machine, a cockpit of levers and gauges. As he prepared to lift the massive counterweights into place, the first sign of trouble appeared. Hey guys, Thomas's voice crackled over the radio from his position near the crane. You're not going to believe this, but we're having some issues up here. Define issues, Eric's calm voice replied from the monitoring station. Alan's electronics are glitching. The crane's computer isn't letting him pick up the counterweight. He's shaking his head, says he's never seen it do this. At the monitoring station 100 yards away, Eris saw Eric stiffen. He pointed a finger at the screen of the spectrum analyzer. Look, Eric said, his voice low. A sharp, unmistakable spike had appeared on the waterfall display. A clean, narrowband signal right at 1.6 gigahertz. It's back. Travis breathed. Right on cue. The signal was transient, appearing and disappearing in short bursts, but its presence at the exact moment the crane, a giant metal object being grounded near the anomaly, began to experience electronic failure was undeniable. Is the source inside the ground, Travis wondered aloud? Is the crane acting as an antenna drawing the signal out? Get him to rotate the arm, Eric said, into his radio. Let's see if the signal changes with its position. He can't, Thomas relayed. The controls are frozen. Eris watched fascinated. This was a direct measurable interaction. They were no longer passive observers. They were participants in a bizarre dialogue with an unseen force. A force that could apparently manipulate complex computer systems from a distance. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the problem resolved. Whoa, we're good now. Thomas's surprised voice came over the radio. Alan says the controls just came back online. Eric pointed to his screen. The 1.6 gigahertz signal was gone, vanished. It let him go, Travis said, a note of awe in his voice. It was like it was saying, I see you, I can stop you, now proceed. With the electronics mysteriously restored, the operation began. The massive crane arm extended its hook, latching onto the thick chains wrapped around the first boulder, a monster of a rock weighing an estimated 20 tons. With a groan of protesting metal, the boulder lifted into the air, swinging away from the mesa face. Signals back, Eric announced, his voice flat, and it's stronger. As the crane moved the boulder, the 1.6 gigahertz signal on Eric's screen grew in intensity, pulsing in time with the machine's movements. When the crane stopped, the signal weakened. When it moved again, the signal flared. It's a proximity-based interaction, Eris realized. The energy field, whatever it is being excited by the large moving metallic mass. He felt a surge of adrenaline. This was data. Hard quantifiable, beautiful data. They worked for hours, moving one massive boulder after another, clearing the face of the mesa. Each lift was accompanied by a corresponding flare-up of the 1.6 gigahertz signal. It was a perfect correlation, as clear as any textbook experiment. They were mapping the edges of an invisible energy field by watching its reaction to the crane. Finally, Thomas called a halt. That's as far as we can go safely, he radioed. The rocks at the bottom are supporting the whole hillside. Any more and we risk a major slide. The moment the crane powered down its main engine, the 1.6 gigahertz signal vanished and did not return. The silence it left on the spectrum analyzer was more profound than any noise. It's gone, Eric confirmed. It's waiting, Travis corrected him. They had cleared a path. They now had a perfect flat surface to bring in a drilling rig and aim it directly at the heart of the vertical anomaly Jan's radar had discovered. Do you copy? Travis radioed. We're tracking you. Proceed to 1,000 feet above the triangle. Copy that, Cameron's voice replied, clear and professional. Approaching the target zone. The helicopter hovered a dragonfly against the blue canvas of the sky. Okay, Cameron, Travis directed. On my mark, they dropped the payloads. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, drop. Eris watched the sky but saw nothing. The balls were too small to be seen from the ground. Drops away, Caleb confirmed from the air. Suddenly, Thomas, who was standing next to Eris, flinched. He put a hand to the back of his neck. You okay? Eris asked. My head? Getting a weird tingling pain, Thomas said, his face pale. I got to get off the ranch. Now. His reaction was so sudden and so visceral that there was no argument. This was the same man who had been hospitalized years earlier with a severe head injury after excavating on the mesa, an injury his doctors could not explain. Travis immediately got on the radio. Caleb, Eric, we have a situation. Thomas is experiencing a medical issue. He's leaving the property. Is everything okay up there? We're fine, Eric replied. But Travis, I'm getting a 1.6 gigahertz signal down here. It just popped up. Eris's blood ran cold. The helicopter hovers over the triangle. Thomas has a sudden neurological event. The 1.6 gigahertz signal appears. 3 seemingly unrelated events happening in perfect synchronicity. With Thomas safely on his way off the ranch, the experiment continued, but a dark cloud now hung over it. Cameron ascended to the next target altitude, 5,000 feet above the ground, the upper limit of the identified anomaly. The higher the helicopter climbed, the more erratic its movements became. Dragon be advised, we're hitting extreme turbulence up here. Cameron's voice was tight with strain. The winds just went from 8 knots to 35. My compass is spinning. There are no high winds reported in the region, Travis said, checking the meteorological data on his laptop. You should be in clear, calm air. Tell that to the helicopter, Cameron shot back. We're getting pushed all over the sky. Every time I get close to being directly over the triangle, it's like hitting a wall. They watched as the helicopter struggled, crabbing sideways against an over the ranch. Cameron announced, "We're going to try to make the drop. Get ready." A moment later, his voice came back, laced with panic. "What the heck? We've lost GPS. All satellites just dropped out. Holy crap." On the ground, Eris looked at the laptop, tracking the helicopter's GPS data logger. The neat, clean line representing the helicopter's flight path had suddenly become a chaotic scribble. It showed the helicopter making impossible vertical jumps of over 600 feet and horizontal leaps of miles in an instant. The data was utterly corrupted. "We're aborting," Cameron declared. "There's lightning in the area and we have no positional awareness. We're coming down." The helicopter descended, and as it left the airspace above the triangle, the turbulence ceased and the GPS signal returned to normal. Later in the command center, the team gathered to review the day's harrowing events. Eric brought up the GPS data log. "This is the flight path," he said, tracing the insane scribbles on the screen. According to the data, Cameron flew you miles off the ranch and performed a vertical climb of exactly 666.1 feet in 0 seconds. Neither of which I assume actually happened. Not even close. Cameron confirmed, shaking his head. "It happened right when my instruments went haywire, and I felt that buzzing from the tower." Thomas, who had returned feeling better, added, "It's all connected." Then Eric brought up the video from the ground cameras. He applied a series of contrast-enhancing filters, making the bright sky darken and revealing hidden details. "I'll just ask you to tell me if you see it," he said cryptically. He played the video of the helicopter hovering at 1,000 feet at the exact moment Thomas felt the pain, and the 1.6 gigahertz signal had appeared. As the filter was applied, a new object resolved into view, flying in perfect formation just beside the helicopter. It was a small, metallic, disc-shaped object. It glinted in the sun, a solid physical craft that had been completely invisible to the naked eye. A collective gasp went through the room. "What in God's name is that?" The Attorney General whispered, his voice full of disbelief. Eris stared his mind, refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. It was there, in broad daylight. A physical, structured, metallic craft flying alongside their helicopter inside a pocket of malfunctioning GPS extreme turbulence, neurological effects, and a mysterious radio signal. It was the perfect storm of high strangeness. Every single data stream, from human biology to complex electronics to the fundamental laws of physics, had been violated simultaneously. And right in the middle of it all was a flying saucer. Eris Thorne, the man of rock, of logic, of quantifiable truth, finally had to admit it. He was in over his head. The rocks were the least of his problems. The real mystery was in the sky, and it was looking back. Part 4. The Echo in the Deep. Chapter 9. The Reckoning. The command center, once a hub of methodical scientific inquiry, now felt like the aftermath of a seismic event. The air was thin, charged with a silence that was heavier than any sound. On the main monitor, the filtered video played that he gestured towards the screen, but by the people who fly those Blackhawks. "You have kicked a hornet's nest, gentlemen, and now we need to figure out if it belongs to the bees or the wasps." Brandon Fugel, who had been staring at the screen with the intensity of a man watching his life's purpose unfold, finally turned away. This footage does not leave this room. Not yet. The implications, they're too vast. We have no context, no understanding of what we're dealing with. To release this now would be irresponsible. It would be a match thrown into a powder keg. Travis Taylor, who had been vibrating with a kind of ecstatic energy, finally burst. Context, Brandon. This is the context. This is the Rosetta Stone. It ties everything together. The 1.6 gigahertz signal isn't just interference. It's a byproduct of their propulsion or communication system. Thomas's medical episodes aren't just random physiological reactions. They're the result of being in close proximity to a powerful energy field. Sea of speculation, but it did little to calm the storm raging inside Eris Thorne. Eris, the man of rock and reason, felt the very foundations of his reality cracking beneath him. He had built his career, his entire intellectual identity, on the principle that the universe was a complex but ultimately knowable system of physical laws. What he had just seen was not a footnote to those laws. It was a wrecking ball. He felt a sudden desperate need for air for the solid ground he no longer trusted. Without a word, he stood up and walked out of the command center, the frantic voices of the others fading behind him. The evening air was cool, smelling of sage and dust. The sun was setting, painting the western sky in hues of orange and violet. Eris walked away from the lights of the homestead, his boots crunching on the dry earth until he reached the edge of the pasture. He leaned against a weathered fence post and stared out at the mesa now, a hulking silhouette against the dying light. For his entire life, that rock formation would have been a story of uplift and erosion, a billion-year epic written in sandstone and shale. Now it was a tomb, or a garage. The sheer ludicrous banality of the thought almost made him laugh. He had spent his life reading the history of the earth, and now he was confronted with the possibility that someone else had come along and scribbled in the margins. He thought of the metallic shavings, the impossible alloys. He thought of the perfectly cylindrical pillar buried deep within the stone. He thought of the invisible, energy-wielding blob that had swatted a rocket out of the sky. And now he thought of the disc, a machine, an honest-to-God flying machine that had no business being there. His skepticism, his most trusted tool, had not been defeated. It had been rendered obsolete. You cannot be skeptical of a tidal wave when you are already underwater. The question was no longer if it was real. The question was, what in God's name did he do now? He could walk away. He could return to his university, to his grants, to his comfortable world of seismic charts and mineral assays. He could pretend this island of impossible truths didn't exist and live out his life in blissful, willful ignorance. Or he could stay. He could abandon the map and venture into the terrifying, uncharted territory that had just been revealed. He could be one of the first to study not just the rock, but what was hidden inside it. It was professional suicide. It was also the most important scientific challenge in human history. He looked up at the first stars beginning to appear in the twilight sky. They no longer looked like distant burning balls of gas. They looked like destinations. His mind made up, he turned and walked back towards the command center, the weight of a new world on his shoulders. Chapter 10, The Point of No Return. When Eris re-entered the room, the frenetic energy had coalesced into a tense, focused debate. They had moved past the shock and were now grappling with the terrifying operational realities of their discovery. My contacts will want to classify this, Attorney General Reyes was saying. They'll wrap this entire ranch in so much red tape and non-disclosure agreements that you won't be able to sneeze without a security clearance. This footage in their eyes is a matter of national, perhaps global security. It's my property, Sean Brandon countered his voice firm, and this is a scientific investigation. We can't allow it to be buried and locked away in some government vault. That's what happened here for decades under Bigelow. We are here to bring this into the light, not hide it deeper in the shadows. The moment you drill into that mesa again, you might force their hand, Reyes warned. The military doesn't just surveil for fun. That Black Hawk was a message. They know what you're doing, and they are monitoring your progress. If you cross a line, if you make contact, they will not hesitate to intervene. Thomas Winterton, who had been sitting quietly, spoke up, his voice a low growl. We've been living with this thing for years. It's hurt people, it's killed livestock, it's played games with our heads. We're past the point of being scared off by a helicopter. We need to know what it is, we need to face it. All eyes in the room eventually turned to Eris. He was the outsider, the fresh-faced skeptic brought in to provide a grounded geological perspective. His opinion in this moment of paradigm shift carried a unique weight. For my entire grill, we aim for the vertical pillar Jan's radar located. It stands adjacent to the dome. It may be a support structure, an energy conduit, a doorway, we don't know. But it is our clearest, most well-defined target. We must breach it. The finality in his tone was absolute. The geologist, the ultimate skeptic, had just advocated for what was, in essence, an act of interdimensional breaking and entering. A slow smile spread across Travis's face. Thomas nodded grimly. Brandon Fugel looked at Eris, a deep respect in his eyes. Then that's what we do. Brandon said, his voice ringing with authority. Thomas, get the drilling company back out here. Tell them we have new coordinates. Eric, Travis, Eris, I want a full spectrum monitoring protocol. We measure everything: seismic, magnetic, radiological, biological. If that thing so much as sneezes, I want to know what it's made of. He looked at the Attorney General. Sean, I understand your concerns, but this is bigger than national security. Followed were a blur of intense preparation. The atmosphere on the ranch had transformed. The quiet curiosity of scientific exploration had been replaced by the focused, high-stakes tension of a bomb disposal squad approaching a live device. The drilling rig that arrived was a newer, more powerful model, its diesel engine, a throaty roar that seemed to challenge the valley's silence. The crew, the same one from the previous year, looked at the new drill site, the cleared patch of earth at the foot of the boulder-strewn mesa, with a mixture of professional interest and nervous apprehension. They had been the ones to hit the impenetrable dome before. They knew this was no ordinary job. Under Eris's direction, they calibrated the drill for a new angle of attack, aiming higher up the mesa's face on a trajectory that would, if his calculations were correct, intersect with the mysterious vertical pillar about 50 feet inside the rock. We're not just drilling for core samples this time. Eris explained to the lead driller, a man named Coop, with a face like a roadmap of every oil field in the West. We're attempting to penetrate an unknown object. I need real-time feedback on density, resistance, vibration, and temperature. Anything, and I mean anything out of the ordinary, you report it to me instantly. Coop nodded, spitting a stream of tobacco juice. Doc, for what Mr. Fugel's paying you tell me to drill to China, I'll just ask if you want to come out the other side, feet first or head first. While the drill was being set up, the science team implemented what Travis had dramatically dubbed the breach protocol. It was the most comprehensive sensory network they had ever deployed. Eric established a perimeter of RF and ELF, extremely low-frequency magnetic sensors, creating a virtual net around the mesa to catch any electromagnetic pulse. Travis set up a cosmic ray detector and a gravimeter, hoping to spot any subtle fluctuations in the local gravitational field or high-energy particle emissions. Eris, for his part, deployed a string of highly sensitive acoustic sensors deep into boreholes drilled around the main site. If that pillar is an energy conduit or a piece of machinery, he explained it might first. But the complexity is, it's off the scale. Forget the signal. The gravity field is tearing itself apart. Travis yelled his voice, a mixture of terror and glee. The fluctuations are localized right at the borehole. It's creating a micro-singularity or something I've never seen anything like it. On the thermal monitor, the rock face around the drill was no longer white hot. It was a blinding solar flare of pure energy. The very air seemed to shimmer with the heat. The sandstone began to glow first, a dull cherry red, then a bright molten orange. The rock itself was melting. It's going to blow, Thomas shouted, pulling Eris further back. Coop, seeing the glowing rock and realizing the futility of his fight with the controls, made a split-second decision. With a desperate roar, he slammed a large red button on the panel, the emergency hydraulics release. There was a deafening bang, a shower of sparks, and the main drill assembly shot backwards on its track, disengaging from the drill string still buried in the mesa. The moment the connection was severed, the pressure released. From the glowing borehole, a beam of pure cobalt blue light, no thicker than a pencil, shot out with a deafening crack like a bolt of lightning. It struck the abandoned drill string, the long series of connected pipes leading into the rock. For a single silent, breathtaking moment, the entire length of steel glowed with the same ethereal blue light. Then it didn't just break or melt, it vaporized. 48 feet of tungsten carbide and hardened steel ceased to exist, turning into a cloud of incandescent gas that erupted outwards from the borehole. The force of the blast wave threw Eris and Thomas to the ground. The shock wave ripped through the valley, a physical punch that rattled the command center miles away and echoed off the distant mountains. And then silence. A profound, absolute, and terrifying silence. The alarms in the command center stopped. The vibrating ground grew still. The high-pitched whine was gone. Eris pushed himself up his ears, ringing a metallic taste in his mouth. He stared at the mesa. The rock around the borehole was no longer glowing. It was a blackened, glassy crater steam hissing from its vitrified surface. The multi-million-dollar drill string that had been buried within it a moment before had vanished without. Chapter 13, The Silent Warning. In the aftermath, an unnatural calm descended upon Skinwalker Ranch. It was a silence that was more unnerving than the preceding chaos. The constant background chatter of radio frequencies Eric always monitored had flatlined. The air was still. Thomas noted that the birds had vanished from the trees and the insects had fallen silent. The entire 512-acre property seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. The damage assessment was brief and sobering. The drilling rig's primary drive was wrecked, its hydraulics fried by the energy surge. But the true mystery was the drill string. It wasn't broken, twisted, or melted. It was gone. 48 feet of specialized steel weighing several tons had been utterly and completely annihilated. Travis theorized it had been subjected to a process akin to molecular dissociation, its atomic bonds instantly broken, turning solid matter into superheated gas. It was a feat of energy manipulation that was for humanity purely theoretical. It wasn't an attack, Aris said, as the team gathered in the command center, the screens now displaying the captured data from the event. It was a statement, a demonstration. It used our own drill string as a fuse to expel the energy. It could have aimed that beam at us, at the rig, at this command center. It didn't. It was a calculated, precise, and deeply intimidating warning shot. He pointed to the acoustic data. The thrum we felt before the main event, it wasn't a random vibration. It was the sound of something powering up, like a capacitor charging. It was preparing its response the moment we made contact. The most compelling and terrifying data came from Eric's spectral analysis. He had isolated the complex, nested signal that had burst forth. It's not a communication in any way we understand it, he explained, displaying a complex fractal-like waveform on the screen. It's more like a key or an activation code. It didn't carry information, it was the information. It was a command that initiated the energy discharge. The pillar we drilled into isn't just a structure, it's a component. We flipped a switch and it completed the circuit. The true discovery, however, came when the rock face had cooled enough for them to send in a remote drone. Thomas, a master pilot, skillfully maneuvered a small camera-equipped quadcopter towards the blackened borehole. The footage appeared on the main screen grainy and stark. The edges of the hole were smooth, vitrified, a perfect circle of black obsidian-like glass. The drone pushed forward its light, piercing the darkness within. The camera feed showed the rough-hewn walls of the borehole for about 10 feet, and then the walls changed. The rough rock gave way to a surface that was perfectly smooth, dark, and non-reflective. It was a material that seemed to absorb the drone's light, revealing no texture, no seams, no features. The borehole, their point of entry, had opened into a hollow artificial chamber. They had breached the pillar. "Hold it there," Aris commanded, his voice tight. Thomas held the drone steady. The chamber was vast. The drone's light couldn't find the other side. It was like staring into a void. "Can you pan down?" Travis asked. Thomas tilted the drone's camera. The smooth, featureless wall curved downwards, a perfect, seamless arc. They were looking at the interior of a massive hollow cylinder. "We're in," Brandon Fugel said, his voice a reverent whisper. "We're finally in." They had spent years, millions of dollars, and countless hours trying to get inside the mesa. Now they had. They had opened a window into another world, and the silent, waiting intelligence on the other side now knew it. The silence of the ranch was no longer just an absence of sound. It was the silence of a predator that knows you've seen it, the chilling calm before the strike. They had their proof, their smoking gun. The problem was, the gun was still loaded. It was pointed directly at them, and they had no idea what would make it fire again. Chapter 14, The Watchers. The discovery of the inner chamber shifted the team's entire operational paradigm. The mission was no longer about detection, it was about exploration. But how do you explore a place that can vaporize steel and warp gravity? "Human entry is off the table," Brandon stated flatly, a position no one dared to argue. "We cannot risk a life. Whatever we do next has to be remote, and it has to be cautious." The debate raged for days. Travis argued for sending in a probe that could emit a broad spectrum of signals to try and communicate. Eric countered that any emission could be seen as another act of aggression. Aris advocated for a purely passive approach, a sophisticated optical probe connected by a shielded fiber optic cable to simply look and listen. While they planned the feeling of being watched intensified, the silence of the ranch was now punctuated by fleeting, inexplicable events. One night, the security cameras on Homestead 2 went down for exactly 33 seconds, and when they came back online, a single massive triangular indentation was pressed into the ground directly in front of the main door, as if a multi-ton object had gently landed and taken off again. There were no tracks leading to or from it. Thomas's security patrols began reporting anomalies on the high ridges overlooking the valley. Through their advanced thermal optics, they would spot tall, slender figures standing motionless, watching the homesteads. These figures registered as cold spots on the thermal imagers, black silhouettes against the warmer background. The moment a spotlight was trained on their position, they would vanish. Not run, not hide, vanish. They're not human as Shake and Caleb reported after one such sighting. The way they move, or rather, don't move, it's wrong. And they're tall, 8, maybe 9 feet. The pressure from the outside world was mounting as well. The black helicopter became a daily visitor, its flights growing bolder. It would hover just outside the property line for hours, a dark, menacing punctuation mark in the sky. Attorney General Reyes' inquiries were met with a wall of bureaucratic silence. It's a skiff, he told Brandon over a secure line, referring to a sensitive compartmented information facility. My sources tell me a mobile command center has been established at a private airfield about 30 miles from you. They're running a full-scale monitoring operation. They know you breached the object, Brandon. They're just waiting to see what you do next. They want whatever's in there as much as you do. The team felt themselves being squeezed in a vice. On one side, a silent, impossibly powerful, and utterly alien intelligence lay waiting behind a hole in a mountain. On the other, the full clandestine weight of the United States military-industrial complex was breathing down their necks. They were isolated on their island of weird, with watchers on all sides. Aris, the man of science, found himself in the unbelievable position of mediating between the two factions. We have to assume the intelligence in the Mesa and the military are two separate, non-cooperative entities, he argued during a tense strategy session. The military is just as blind as we are. They are reacting to our actions. But the entity in the Mesa, it is reacting to us directly. It is the variable we can perhaps influence. His logic prevailed. The final decision was made. They would proceed with Aris's plan. They commissioned a custom-built, heavily shielded microprobe. It was a marvel of engineering, equipped with high-definition cameras, acoustic sensors, a miniature spectrometer to analyze atmospheric composition, and a laser-ranging system to map the interior. It would be their remote eyes and ears, their surrogate explorer, into the impossible chamber. As the probe was being built with feverish urgency, a final chilling event solidified their resolve. One evening, as Eric was reviewing the continuous data stream from the sensors they had left aimed at the borehole, he noticed a faint intermittent signal. It was weak, almost lost in the background noise. It was not the powerful 1.6 gigahertz frequency, but something far more subtle. He spent hours isolating and cleaning the signal. When he was done, he called the team into the command center, his face pale. He played the audio. It was a soft, rhythmic, pulsing sound. A slow, steady beat like a giant sleeping heart. Thump, 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 thump. It was coming from inside the mesa. It had started the day they breached the pillar. The dragon was no longer sleeping. It was awake. And it was waiting, part 6, into the void. Chapter 15, The Emissary. The probe, when it arrived, voice low and steady over the comms. He was positioned at a forward observation post near the mesa, his eyes glued to a ruggedized tablet displaying the probe's main camera feed. Negative, Eric replied from the command center. The heartbeat is steady. No change in amplitude or frequency. It's like it doesn't even notice us. It notices, Thomas muttered from his position beside Aris. It's just not impressed. Slowly, inch by painstaking inch, the emissary was lowered into the darkness. The moment it passed, the 10-foot mark crossing the threshold from natural rock to the impossible seamless material of the inner chamber, the camera feed shifted. The rough-hewn stone vanished, replaced by a wall of perfect light-absorbing black. Spectrometer is online. Travis's voice announced, filled with a scientist's awe. Atmospheric composition, reading a nitrogen-oxygen mix, but with trace elements I've never seen before. And a high concentration of noble gases, argon, xenon. It's almost like the air is ancient, preserved. The probe descended further into the vast hollow cylinder. Its powerful lights, which could illuminate a football field, seemed to be swallowed by the oppressive darkness. The laser ranging system began its work firing invisible beams to map the chamber's dimensions. The results that trickled back to the command center were staggering. The chamber, it's bigger than we thought, Eric said, his voice hushed. The diameter is over 200 feet, and the depth, the lasers haven't found the bottom yet. We're over 300 feet down, and there's no floor in sight. They were inside a vertical shaft of impossible scale, a well leading down into the very roots of the mountain built by an intelligence beyond their comprehension. The heartbeat is getting louder, Aris noted, listening to the amplified audio feed from the probe's acoustic sensors. The slow rhythmic thump-thump was no longer just a faint signal. It was a palpable presence, a sound that seemed to resonate in his own chest. At 500 feet down, the probe's lights finally caught something. It wasn't the floor. It was a change in the wall. "Hold the descent," Eris ordered. "Thomas, can you maneuver it closer to the eastern wall?" On it, the superintendent replied, his hands moving deftly over the drone controls that had been adapted to pilot the probe. The emissary's legs found purchase on the smooth vertical surface, and it crawled sideways like an insect. The camera zoomed in. The perfectly black, featureless wall was interrupted by a series of faint, almost invisible lines. They were not cracks or seams, but impossibly fine grooves etched into the material, forming intricate geometric patterns that spiraled down the shaft. They resembled a cross between a circuit board and a work of abstract art. "It's writing," Travis whispered. "Or a schematic, a language." As the probe's light traced the lines, the patterns began to glow with a soft internal silver light. The light flowed through the grooves like electricity, illuminating an ever-expanding web of complex symbols and diagrams that covered the entire wall. And as the wall lit up, the heartbeat stopped. The sudden, absolute silence was more shocking than any explosion. For a moment, the only sound was the frantic typing of Eric on his keyboard. "What is it? What happened?" Brandon Fugel's voice was tight with anxiety. "The primary signal is gone," Eric said, "but something else is taking its place. The wall, the patterns, they're emitting a signal, a low-frequency radio wave. It's melodic." He patched the signal through to the main audio. A low, hauntingly beautiful series of tones filled the command center. It was a complex, layered harmony that was both alien and strangely familiar, a song from the heart of the mountain. The probe's camera panned across the now glowing wall, revealing the true scale of the illuminated patterns. They were seeing a map, a star chart. But the constellations were wrong. The arrangement of galaxies was alien. And at the center of the map, a symbol glowed with a brighter intensity, a perfect seven-pointed star. "It's not a ship," Eris breathed, a profound, earth-shattering realization dawning on him. "And it's not a base." "Then what is it?" Thomas asked. Eris stared at the alien star chart, at the intricate glowing language, and listened to the celestial music echoing from the depths. "It's a library," he said, "or a tomb, or a lighthouse. It's a message in a bottle thrown into the cosmic ocean billions of years ago." As he spoke, a new light appeared from the impenetrable darkness far below, a single brilliant point of white light ascending rapidly towards them. "We have movement," Eric shouted. "Something's coming up the shaft. Fast!" The light grew in intensity, resolving into a small spherical object that pulsed with a soft internal luminescence. It moved without sound, without propulsion, climbing the immense vertical shaft with effortless grace. It stopped about 20 feet below the emissary, hovering in the vast silent space, regarding their probe like a curious animal. It was the size of a fist, a perfect sphere of living light. "Is it a drone, a defense mechanism?" Brandon asked. "I don't think so," Travis said, his voice filled with a wonder that bordered on religious reverence. "Look at the energy readings. It's not emitting anything we can measure. It's stable, quiet." For a long moment, the two probes, man's clumsy mechanical emissary and the silent, elegant sphere of light, faced each other in the depths of the earth. Then the sphere pulsed once, a brilliant, gentle flash of light. And every screen in the command center, every tablet, every phone connected to the network went black. They were blind. The emissary was gone. The only thing left was the haunting alien melody still playing over the speakers, a song from a world that had just finally said hello. Chapter 16, The Gift of Fire. The blindness lasted for 3 minutes. 3 minutes of frantic, adrenaline-fueled chaos in the command center as the team fought to restore their connection to the emissary. It was a lifetime. They were completely cut off from their multi-million-dollar probe, hanging by a thread half a thousand feet inside an alien structure with an unknown object of impossible origin hovering just feet away. Eris felt a primal fear grip him. They had been arrogant. They had trespassed into a sacred place, a place of immense power and antiquity, and it had effortlessly blinded them, severing their connection to the world they knew. Then, as suddenly as they had died, the screens flickered back to life. The camera feed from the emissary was back crystal clear. The small sphere of light was gone. The chamber was as it had been, dark, silent, and vast. The haunting music had ceased. The glowing patterns on the wall had faded back into near invisibility. The deep rhythmic heartbeat had not returned. Report Brandon Fugel commanded, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. All probe systems are nominal. Eric reported, his fingers flying across his keyboard. Power levels are stable. Connection is strong. It's like nothing happened. Something happened, Travis said, staring at the screen of his laptop, his face pale. The data buffer, during the blackout, the emissary was still recording. It just couldn't transmit. I'm downloading it now. The download took less than 10 seconds, but the anticipation in the room was so thick, Eris felt he could barely breathe. What had the sphere done to their probe? Travis brought the file up on the main screen. It wasn't video. It wasn't audio. It was a torrent of pure raw data, a waterfall of code and mathematics, so complex and dense, it looked like static. What is it? Eris asked. I don't know, Travis admitted, scrolling through the endless lines of information. It's not a language in any human sense. There's no syntax, no grammar. It's pure information. Physics, engineering, astronomy, biology. It's like they downloaded a university library directly into the probe's memory. For the next hour, they stared at the data stream, a team of humanity's brightest minds rendered into bewildered children. They could recognize fragments, glimpses of concepts they understood, but the underlying structure was light years beyond them. They saw what looked like a complete unified theory of quantum gravity expressed not in equations, but in a kind of geometric multi-dimensional logic. They saw a star chart that showed the evolution of the Milky Way galaxy over the next billion years. They saw a diagram of a biological molecule with a triple, not a double helix. It was a gift of fire from the gods, a treasure trove of knowledge, so advanced it was functionally incomprehensible. This is a test, Eris said, finally understanding. It wasn't a hostile act, it wasn't a warning. The sphere saw that we were a technological intelligence, and it gave us a gift, a key. It's showing us the path. It's testing us to see if we're intelligent enough to understand it. The implications were staggering. The entity in the mesa was not a monster. It was not a malevolent force. It was a teacher or a gatekeeper. It was a silent sentinel guarding a legacy of knowledge, waiting for a species to evolve to a point where they were ready to receive it. Their moment of profound revelation was shattered by a frantic call from Caleb over the security channel. Sir, we have a major situation at the perimeter. That black helicopter is back, and it's not hovering this time. It's landing, and it's not alone. We've got a convoy of black SUVs approaching the main gate. They're military. They're here, sir. They're coming in. The screen showing the external security cameras switched to the main gate feed. A line of imposing black vehicles had stopped just outside the fence. Men in black tactical gear armed with assault rifles were disembarking. The skiff was no longer mobile. The military had come to claim their prize. Brandon Fugel's face was grim stone. They saw the energy discharge from the drilling. They must have detected the data burst. They know we made contact. Eris looked from the incomprehensible alien data on one screen to the armed soldiers on the other. They had kicked the hornet's nest, and now both the bees and the wasps had come swarming. They were caught between two forces of immense power, one that offered the secrets of the universe and one that would kill to keep them. Thomas Brandon said, his voice cold steel, "Lock it down. No one gets on this property." "They've got a lot more guns than we do," Boss Thomas replied, his voice grim. "I don't care," Brandon said, his eyes burning with a fierce protective fire. "What we have here is the single greatest discovery in human history. It does not belong to the generals. I will not let them take it." The standoff had begun. The battle for Skinwalker Ranch and for the future of humanity was about to be fought not just with sensors and science, but with guns and barbed wire. And in the heart of the mountain, the silent, ancient intelligence waited to see what its promising new students would do next. Part 7, The Siege. Chapter 17, The Man in Black. The nameplate on the lead officer's tactical vest read Vance. He was a man carved from granite and authority with cold, clear eyes that seemed to assess everything in terms of threat and asset. He didn't shout or make threats. He simply stood before the reinforced steel gate of Skinwalker Ranch, flanked by a dozen soldiers who moved with the quiet, predatory efficiency of a wolf pack and waited. His silence was more intimidating than any command. Brandon Fugel, accompanied by Thomas and a grim-faced Eris, drove the short distance from the command center to the gate. He stopped the ATV a safe distance away, the barrels of the soldiers' rifles glinting in the harsh Utah Sunday. "That's far enough," Brandon said, his voice amplified by a small loudspeaker. "This is private property. State your purpose." Colonel Vance stepped forward, his boots crunching on the gravel. He held up a hand, and his men who had their rifles in a low ready position relaxed infinitesimally. It was a clear demonstration of control. Mr. Fugel Vance's voice was calm, resonant, and carried easily in the still air. "My name is Colonel Vance, United States Air Force. I'm not here to negotiate. I have a warrant issued under the National Security Act. We have reason to believe there is an unregistered, non-terrestrial asset on your property that poses a significant and immediate threat to the security of this nation. We are here to secure that asset. Open the gate." A threat Brandon countered his voice, dripping with incredulity. The only threat I see is a contingent of federal soldiers pointing guns at private citizens on their own land. You have no jurisdiction here without the consent of the local sheriff and a warrant signed by a federal judge. The warrant I have, Vance said, tapping a folder held by the man next to him, supersedes all local authority. You detected an energy event of unknown magnitude approximately 2 hours ago. That event was followed by a data transmission of unparalleled complexity. You are in possession of materials and information that are now the property of the United States government. This is your only chance to cooperate. Eris felt a chill run down his spine. They had known they were being monitored, but the speed and specificity of Vance's knowledge were terrifying. They hadn't just seen the smoke. They had analyzed the chemical composition of the fire from miles away. The only thing I am in possession of is the deed to this land, Brandon said, his voice hard as iron, and the only way you're coming through that gate is with a 30-ton tank. And even then, I'd advise against it. Things on this ranch have a way of disagreeing with uninvited guests. A flicker of something not amusement, but perhaps recognition passed through Vance's cold eyes. We are aware of the anecdotal history of this location, Mr. Fugel. We are prepared for any environmental eccentricities. You have no idea what you're prepared for, Thomas muttered under his breath. Open the gate, Mr. Fugel Vance, repeated his voice, losing its patient edge. Do not force me to escalate this situation. He raised his hand again, and this time the rifles came up sights, trained on the 3 men in the ATV. The standoff was absolute. A battle of wills fought over a barbed wire fence. Eris's heart pounded in his chest. He looked from the heavily armed soldiers to the silent watching mesa that loomed over the entire scene. He had a sudden terrifying vision of the two forces colliding, of human arrogance and alien power meeting in a cataclysm of fire and light. And then the ranch responded. It didn't start with a bang or a flash. It started with a sound, or rather an absence of it. The low hum of the engines in the black SUVs suddenly choked and died all at once, as if a switch had been thrown. The soldiers' complex radio headsets, moments before crackling with encrypted chatter, went dead silent. A red light on Colonel Vance's own wrist-mounted device blinked once, then went dark. What is it? Comm status Vance barked his calm, finally breaking. No power, sir. One of the soldiers shouted, his voice now unnervingly loud in the sudden silence. Everything's dead. Vehicles, comms, everything. An invisible, powerful electromagnetic pulse had washed over them, but it was surgical precise. The lights in the command center flickered but held. The ATV's engine, a simple, non-computerized diesel, continued to rumble peacefully. The pulse had targeted only the advanced military hardware. Then came the second wave. Eris saw it first as a shimmer in the air above the soldiers like heat haze on a summer road. The shimmer coalesced, solidified. His mind, the mind of a scientist, tried to process what he was seeing, but his brain refused to cooperate. For a terrifying, eternal moment, the soldiers were no longer standing in the Utah desert. The landscape around them had dissolved, replaced by a swirling, chaotic vista of impossible geometry and alien constellations, the very star chart they had just seen deep inside the mesa. The soldiers cried out, stumbling back, grabbing their helmets, their disciplined ranks, breaking into a terrified mob. They were seeing it too, a shared waking nightmare. What is that? What in God's name is happening? A soldier screamed, dropping his rifle and clawing at his own face. Colonel Vance stood his ground, though his face was a mask of disbelief and horror. He was staring transfixed, not at the sky, but at the mesa. Eris followed his gaze. High on the ridge, a figure stood silhouetted against the sky. It was tall, impossibly slender, and it was not human. It was one of the cold, dark watchers Thomas's team had been reporting. It stood motionless, its presence a clear and undeniable statement. This place is protected. You are not welcome here. The vision lasted for perhaps 20 seconds. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished. The soldiers were once again standing on a dusty road, the Utah sky above them, but they were changed. The disciplined soldiers were now just terrified men staring at the ranch with wide, haunted eyes. Vance, shaking his head as if to clear it slowly, lowered his gaze from the now empty ridge. He looked at Brandon, at Thomas, at Eris. The cold certainty in his eyes was gone, replaced by a dawning, horrified respect. "What are you people dealing with here?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I tried to tell you," Colonel Brandon said, his voice quiet but firm. "You're not prepared." The standoff wasn't over, but the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. The military's guns were useless against an enemy that could rewrite reality itself. Chapter 18. The Quarantine. The event at the gate, what Travis immediately dubbed the cognitive override, forced a tense and unstable truce. Colonel Vance, a man clearly accustomed to being the most powerful force in any theater of operations, was forced to accept a stalemate. His vehicles were inert, his communications were down, and his soldiers were psychologically shattered. To his credit, he adapted quickly. He couldn't breach the property, but he would not abandon his mission. He pulled his forces back a quarter of a mile, established a physical perimeter, and brought in older, non-digital equipment. The siege had begun. Skinwalker Ranch was now officially under quarantine, an island cut off from the world with the U.S. military as its warden. For the team inside, the intervention was both a salvation and a curse. It protected us, Travis argued, pacing the command center with manic energy. The intelligence in the Mesa saw the threat and neutralized it non-lethally. It used a targeted EMP and a projected psychotronic event. It's communicating with us. It's showing us what it's capable of. It didn't protect us, it claimed us. Aris countered his perspective far darker. We're not its partners, we're its property. It just told the other kids in the playground not to touch its toys. We're trapped in the cage with the lion, and it just roared at the zookeepers. The grim reality of their situation sank in. They had a universe of knowledge locked in their servers, an alien mind in the mountain next door, and a hostile military force at their gate. They were running out of food, fuel, and time. The focus shifted from exploration to survival, and from survival to a desperate, frantic race to understand the gift they had been given. The incomprehensible data package from the sphere was their only hope. It was a language they had to learn, a key that might unlock a door either to salvation or to their own destruction. Aris Thorne, the geologist who had come to the ranch to study rocks, found himself leading the effort. His methodical, analytical mind was uniquely suited to the task of finding patterns in the chaos. He, Travis, and Eric began a grueling round-the-clock effort to decipher the alien information. They called it the Rosetta Project. They started with the basics, identifying what looked like universal constants: the speed of light, the Planck constant, the charge of an electron. The alien data expressed these not as numbers, but as geometric relationships, fundamental shapes in a multi-dimensional matrix. It was a language of pure concept. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to build a dictionary. A specific fractal pattern corresponded to the element carbon. A complex harmonic resonance represented a gravitational wave. They were learning to read the mind of God, and it was the most demanding intellectual task in human history. As they worked, the ranch remained quiet. The watchers on the ridge were gone. The heartbeat in the mesa remained silent. It was as if the ancient intelligence, having made its move, had retreated into a state of patient observation, waiting to see if its new students were worthy of the lesson. Their first breakthrough came a week into the siege. Aris, bleary-eyed from staring at a complex energy schematic for 36 straight hours, noticed a repeating, elegant symmetry. "It's a power source," he breathed, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. That symbol there, that's vacuum energy, zero-point energy. This is a blueprint for a stable, contained vacuum energy extractor, a power source that draws limitless energy from the fabric of space-time itself. The room fell silent. What they were looking at was a solution to the world's energy crisis. It was a technology that would make fossil fuels, nuclear power, and solar panels obsolete overnight. It was the greatest technological leap in history, and it was displayed on their screen like a page from a simple instruction manual. "If we can build this," Travis began, his voice filled with awe. "We might just have a way out of here," Aris finished. The knowledge was a beacon of hope, but it was also a terrifying burden. To build such a device would be to play with the very foundations of physics. And to reveal it to the world would be to unleash a force that could either save humanity or tear it apart. Outside, Colonel Vance and his silent watching army remained at the gate. Inside, the team had found their first word in the language of the cosmos, and that word was fire. Part 8, The Forge. Chapter 19, The Faustian Bargain. The blueprint for the zero-point energy device glowed on the command center's main screen, a silent testament to a physics they were only beginning to comprehend. It was a promise of infinite power, a solution to all of humanity's problems, and it felt like the most dangerous object in existence. The discovery didn't bring elation, it brought a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that precedes a momentous and terrible choice. "We can't," Aris said, finally breaking the spell. He looked exhausted, his scientific curiosity at war with a profound instinctual fear. "Travis, you of all people should understand. We don't know the principles. We're looking at the final product of 1 billion years of evolution. Trying to build this would be like a tribe of Neanderthals finding a schematic for a fusion reactor. The first step in the instruction manual might be, first create a stable microstar. We could create a singularity. We could erase this entire valley from existence. Or, Travis countered, his eyes blazing, with an almost religious fervor, we could take the next step. This is what it's all about, Eris. This is the test. The intelligence in the mesa didn't just give us a data dump, it gave us a specific practical application. It's a key. It's showing us the way out. It wants us to build it. It's a trap, Eric retorted from his console. The data package was a gift, I'll grant you that. But this is different. This is a weapon. The moment we create a limitless energy source, we become the biggest threat on the planet. Forget Vance and his platoon. Every government on Earth will come for us. This isn't a key, it's a target. The debate raged a microcosm of the conflict that would engulf the world if this knowledge ever escaped the confines of the ranch. It was a fight between caution and ambition, fear and hope. It was Brandon Fugel who brought them back to the grim reality of their situation. He gestured to a secondary monitor displaying a live feed of the military perimeter. Colonel Vance's men were digging and erecting portable sensor arrays, turning their temporary camp into a permanent fortress. Your arguments are academic, Brandon said, his voice low and cutting. Eris, you're worried we might erase the valley. I'm worried Vance will do it for us with a Moab once his patience runs out. Travis, you're talking about the next step in evolution. I'm trying to make sure we survive the next week. Eric, you're worried about becoming a target. We already are one. He turned to face them all, his expression one of hard-won resolve. We are out of options. Vance holds all the cards in the outside world. But in here, he tapped the screen displaying the alien schematic. We have an ace. We're not going to build a weapon, we're going to build a lever. A small-scale prototype, something that demonstrates our capabilities beyond any doubt. Something that forces Vance to the negotiating table, not as a conqueror, but as an equal. We don't have to win. We just have to show him he can't. His logic was inescapable. They were trapped. Their only path forward was to embrace the very danger Eris feared. It was a Faustian bargain, a pact with a silent alien devil for a chance at salvation. Thomas Winterton, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. I don't know about physics, he said, his practical voice grounding them all, but I know about building things. And I know we've got a workshop full of tools and a ranch full of strange materials nobody's ever been able to explain. If you can tell me what to build my team and I will find a way to build it, the decision was made. A heavy, somber consensus settled over the room. They would take the fire from the gods, and they would pray it didn't burn them alive. Chapter 20, The Ghost in the Machine. The ranch's main workshop, once a place for repairing tractors and welding fences, was transformed into the most advanced and strangest laboratory on Earth. The Rosetta Project team moved their operations from the sterile command center to the gritty, oil-stained reality of the forge. The alien blueprint was projected onto a massive whiteboard, its elegant, impossible geometry looming over the lathes, drills, and welding torches. The first hurdle was materials. The schematic called for elements that weren't on the periodic table, and alloys with contradictory properties materials that were superconductive at room temperature, that possessed immense tensile strength, but were lighter than aluminum, that could contain and channel energies that should have vaporized any known matter. It was Caleb, the head of security, who provided the first clue. Remember all those metal fragments we've pulled out of the ground over the years? The stuff the drill hit in the mesa? The weird slag from Homestead 2? They brought out the evidence containers. For years, they had been collecting anomalous materials, strange metallic objects, and fragments that defied analysis. Under the guidance of the alien blueprint, they began to test them. A dull, gray, waxy metal they'd once found melted into a perfect sphere in a cow pasture proved to be the room temperature superconductor they needed. The strange layered flakes they had, drilled from the mesa when melted and recast, formed the light, impossibly strong alloy for the containment vessel. The ranch itself was the source of the materials. The pillar in the mesa wasn't just a library, it was the factory. Over centuries, perhaps millennia, it had been seeding the surrounding land with the very components needed to understand its own technology. They weren't just discovering a blueprint, they were assembling a kit. As they began construction, the phenomenon returned, but in a new and subtle way. It was no longer overt or threatening. It was helpful. A complex calculation that had stumped Travis for hours would suddenly resolve itself on his screen when he wasn't looking. A microscopic flaw in a weld invisible to the human eye would be highlighted by a flicker of static on a nearby monitor. Tools left on a workbench would be found precisely arranged the next morning, as if to suggest the next step in the assembly process. It's helping us, Eric whispered one night as he watched the energy signature from the Mesa pulse in perfect synchrony with the power fluctuations from their workshop. The ghost in the machine It's a master craftsman, and we are its apprentices. The feeling was both comforting and deeply unsettling. Their every move was being watched, guided by an invisible, silent partner. They were not alone in their work. Meanwhile, Colonel Vance was not idle. Having learned that conventional electronic surveillance was impossible, he resorted to more direct methods. One afternoon, a high-altitude drone, little more than a black speck in the sky, released a smaller, unpowered glider. It was a stealth craft designed to ride the thermal currents and observe them with advanced optical sensors, a silent eye in the sky. It drifted over the property line, soaring silently towards the workshop. The team was oblivious, focused on their work, but the ranch was not. As the glider passed over the triangle, its flight path wavered. It wasn't struck by lightning or hit by a pulse. It simply stopped flying. Its aerodynamic properties ceased to exist. It fell from the sky like a stone tumbling end over end until it crashed into the field below, a crumpled wreck of carbon fiber. From his perimeter outpost, Vance watched the event through a powerful telescope. He saw the glider fall. He saw no weapon, no energy beam, no visible cause. He saw an aircraft simply forget how to fly. He lowered the telescope, a muscle twitching in his jaw. His enemy didn't need guns. It could command the laws of physics themselves. The wreckage of the glider served as a stark reminder to both sides. To Vance, it was a confirmation that he was facing a power beyond his comprehension. To the team in the workshop, it was a sign of the protection. They were under a clear message from their silent partner that their work was not to be disturbed. The forge was sacred ground. The apprentices were learning, and the master was watching. Part 9, The Unveiling. Chapter 21, The Heart of the Star. The device, when completed, was a thing of unsettling beauty. It was no larger than a car engine, a complex lattice of the strange recast metals from the ranch, all polished to a mirror sheen. At its heart was a perfectly spherical containment vessel, and inside it, nothing. A perfect vacuum. Wires made from the waxy, superconductive metal snaked through its structure, connecting to a simple, almost primitive-looking console Thomas had rigged up. There were no moving parts, no fuel source. According to the blueprint, it shouldn't do anything. It should just be a sculpture of impossible materials. The final piece was a small crystalline rod, a sliver of quartz-like material they had found embedded deep in the bedrock near the triangle. The schematic showed it as the initiator, the tuning fork that would excite the vacuum and begin the energy cascade. The team gathered around the device in the center of the workshop. The air was thick with a mixture of exhaustion, terror, and a fragile, trembling hope. For 3 weeks they had been besieged, working under the silent tutelage of their alien master, a gun pointed at their heads from the outside world. This was the moment of truth. Once we throw this switch, Eris said, his voice barely a whisper, there's no going back. Either it works or it blows a hole in reality. Are we ready for that? Travis, his face gaunt, but his eyes alight with a fire Eris had never seen before, simply nodded. We were born ready for this, Eris. This is why we're here. Brandon Fugel looked at the faces of his team, the small band of scientists and ranchers who had become the fulcrum of human history. Do it, he said to Thomas. With a calloused hand, the superintendent closed the final connection, sliding the crystalline rod into its socket. For a second, nothing happened. The workshop was silent, save for the hum of the fluorescent lights. A wave of anticlimactic disappointment began to wash over Eris, and then a low hum began to emanate from the device. It was not a mechanical sound, but a pure, perfect tone, the kind of note you imagine the universe itself would sing. A soft blue-white light began to glow from within the vacuum chamber, a tiny captured star being born in the heart of their machine. Eric's voice was a choked gasp from his monitoring station. We have an energy output, it's stable, and it's climbing, exponentially. The light in the chamber intensified, casting sharp, dancing shadows across the workshop. The hum grew in pitch and volume, a celestial choir that vibrated in their bones, in their very teeth. Eris felt the air around him grow warm, charged with an energy that felt alive, clean, and terrifyingly powerful. It's working, Travis breathed, tears streaming down his face. My God, it's working. The device was not just producing electricity, it was warping the space around it. A faint, shimmering distortion like a mirage appeared in the air above the machine. The workshop lights flickered wildly, not because of a power drain, but because the very laws of electromagnetism in the room were being subtly rewritten. They had done it. They had built a star on Earth. Chapter 22, The Shot Across the Bow. A quarter-mile away in a mobile command post, bristling with antennas and sensors, every alarm in Colonel Vance's arsenal screamed at once. His technicians shouted over one another, their voices a panic chorus of disbelief. Sir, we have a massive broad-spectrum energy event originating from the primary structure on the property. It's not a fission or fusion signature. It's nothing I've ever seen before. The scale is off the charts. Gravimetric sensors are going crazy. It's bending local space-time, sir. A minor but measurable distortion. All attempts at electronic surveillance are being reflected. It's like it's inside a perfect mirror. We're completely blind. Vance stared at the main display where a swirling vortex of energy readings had replaced the placid topographical map of the ranch. The readings were not just high, they were impossible. The energy output was equivalent to that of a large nuclear reactor, but there was no heat signature, no radiation, no seismic activity. It was clean, contained, and utterly alien. He had waited. He had respected the strange, inexplicable power of this place. But this was an escalation he could not ignore. This was the activation of a power source that could be weaponized in ways he couldn't even imagine. His mission was to secure the asset, and if that asset was now live, his rules of engagement had changed. He picked up a satellite phone, a specially shielded device that was their last reliable link to the outside world. This is Vance. I have a situation here that is escalating beyond our capacity for containment. I am officially invoking Protocol Chimera. The asset is active. I am requesting a kinetic solution. Repeat, I am requesting a kinetic solution authorization level Omega. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence that stretched across continents. The person he was speaking to was not a general or a politician. It was someone from an organization so secret, it didn't have a name. Authorization granted. Colonel, a calm, synthesized voice replied, "The asset cannot be allowed to remain in civilian hands. A suborbital tungsten rod has been retasked to your coordinates. Impact in 90 minutes. Your orders are to confirm target destruction." "Good luck, Colonel." The line went dead. Vance lowered the phone. He had just condemned a dozen American citizens to death. He had ordered an orbital strike on his own country's soil. He looked out the reinforced window of his command post towards the silent, enigmatic ranch. He felt no triumph, only a cold, heavy certainty. He was a soldier, following orders, a surgeon, cutting out a cancer before it could spread. It was a necessary, terrible duty. He had just sentenced the ranch to annihilation from space. Inside the workshop, the team was celebrating their impossible victory when Eric's face suddenly went pale. An alarm, a quiet, insistent beep from a single overlooked sensor drew his attention. "Brandon," he said, his voice tight with a new kind of fear, "I'm picking up a communication signal. Heavily encrypted military satellite band. It's a short burst transmission from the perimeter to an orbital asset." "They're calling for backup?" Thomas asked. No, Eris said, the horrifying implication dawning on him. He had worked on defense projects. He knew the protocols. An encrypted burst to an orbital asset isn't a call for backup. It's a fire command. They're not sending more soldiers, they're sending a missile. The euphoria in the room evaporated, replaced by the icy grip of impending death. They had built their lever, their key to negotiation, but they had been too slow. Their act of creation had been interpreted as an act of war. They had won the scientific race only to lose the battle for survival. They had 90 minutes to live. Part 10, The Reckoning. Chapter 23, The Devil's Choice. The 90-minute death sentence descended upon the workshop like a physical shroud, choking the air, making every breath feel stolen. The triumph of a moment before was a bitter, mocking memory. Panic sharp and acidic flared in the room. "This is it," then Caleb said, his hand instinctively going to the sidearm on his hip, a useless gesture against an enemy falling from orbit. "We built the greatest thing in human history, and our reward is to be wiped off the map by our own government." I told you, Eris's voice was sharp with recrimination and fear. His scientific detachment shattered. He gestured wildly at the humming, glowing device. "I told you it was a trap. We lit a beacon and the exterminators are coming. We should have smashed it, buried it." And died in the dark. Travis shot back his face, a mask of furious defiance. "No, we will not go gentle into that good night." This, he slammed his palm on the console next to the device, making the blue-white star within it shimmer, is not just a target, it's a weapon. The greatest weapon in existence. "Travis, stop," Eris pleaded. "You don't know what you're saying. We don't control it. We're like children who've lit a match in a munitions depot." Enough. Brandon's voice cut through the chaos like a whip crack. All eyes turned to him. The owner of the ranch stood not as a businessman or an enthusiast, but as a commander facing annihilation. The panic in the room subsided, replaced by the grim focus of a last stand. "Eris is right, we were reckless. Travis is right, we can't give up," Brandon said, his gaze sweeping over each member of his team. "But arguing about the past is a luxury we can't afford. We have one asset, one path." "Eric, what is the device telling you now?" Eric, who had been staring intently at his monitor, looked up. It's changing. The data stream from the blueprint isn't static anymore. It's adapting. It's responding to the energy output to our scans of the perimeter to the satellite link I detected. It's evolving. It's showing us new configurations. On the main screen, the elegant blueprint of the power generator dissolved, reconfiguring itself into a new, more complex, and far more aggressive design. Emitters, focusing lenses, and waveguides appeared in the schematic, a language of directed energy that every scientist in the room understood implicitly. It's a defensive system. Travis breathed his voice, filled with a terrible awe. A directed energy shield. No more than a shield. A gravimetric deflection array. It's designed to create a localized high-intensity gravity well. It wouldn't block the projectile. It would bend space-time itself, forcing it to miss. Bend space-time, Eris laughed, a raw, unhinged sound. Travis, are you listening to yourself? The calculations for that would be staggering. 1 point of a percentage off in the energy calibration, and we don't deflect the rod, we pull it right into us. Or worse, we create a micro black hole and turn the entire state of Utah into a crater. Eric Brandon said, his voice deadly calm. What is our countdown? Eric's eyes flickered to the corner of his screen. 78 minutes. Brandon Fugel looked from Eris's terrified, rational face to Travis's blazing, faithful one. He looked at the impossible machine humming with the power of a newborn Sunday, and he looked at the countdown timer, the digital arbiter of their extinction. He had come to this ranch seeking answers, a journey of curiosity that had led him to the precipice of a choice that would define the future or end it entirely. We are not victims, he said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. We are not going to wait for the sky to fall. We are going to push back. Thomas, get your team. Travis is going to tell you what to build. Eris, I need you at his side. I need your caution to temper his ambition. You will check every calculation, question every assumption. We are going to build this shield, and we are going to live. It was a choice born of pure desperation, a decision to answer one existential threat by embracing another. There was no cheer, no cry of defiance. There was only the grim, silent acceptance of men and women with nothing left to lose. They had made a deal with the devil in the mesa, and the final payment was due. Chapter 24, The Anvil of God. The workshop transformed from a laboratory into a war room. The next 77 minutes were a symphony of controlled chaos, a frantic, desperate race against the unyielding physics of orbital mechanics. The alien intelligence was no longer a passive teacher. It was an active participant. The schematics on the screen evolved in real time, responding to their actions. When Thomas's team struggled to fabricate a specific magnetic focusing coil, the design would simplify, showing them how to achieve the same effect with the materials they had on hand. When Eris and Travis became locked in a debate over a complex energy-to-gravity conversion formula, a new set of equations would appear on the screen, a more elegant and direct solution that satisfied both Eris's need for safety and Travis's demand for power. It's learning from us. Eris realized in a moment of stunned clarity. It's using our own thought processes, our own engineering knowledge to refine its designs. It's not just teaching us, it's collaborating with us. The ghost in the machine had become their co-pilot. While Thomas's team worked with grinders and welders, sparks flying in the air, Eris and Travis fought their own battle on the frontiers of theoretical physics. They were the fire control aiming a weapon they had never conceived of at an enemy they couldn't see. They worked in a strange symbiosis. Travis's intuitive leaps guided and corrected by Eris's methodical skepticism. More power to the primary emitter, Travis would shout. No, it'll destabilize the containment field. We have to bleed the excess energy through the secondary conduits and use them to shape the forward edge of the gravity. Well, Eris would counter his hands flying across a keyboard. Outside, Colonel Vance stood on a small rise binoculars trained on the ranch. He saw the lights in the workshop flickering erratically. His remaining sensors, the few that weren't being actively jammed, told him a story of unimaginable energy being shaped and focused. He knew what they were doing. They were not preparing to surrender. They were preparing to fight back against a tungsten rod falling at Mach 25. A grim, almost sorrowful respect for his adversary settled over him. They were insane, and they were magnificent. The countdown became a drum beat marking the final moments of their lives. 30 minutes, Eric announced, his voice flat. The primary conduits are overheating, Thomas yelled over the shriek of a plasma torch. Reroute the coolant. The schematic shows us how Travis replied, not even looking up from his screen. 15 minutes. The gravimetric field is unstable. I can't hold the simulation together, Eris cried, sweat beading on his forehead. Trust the machine, Eris. It knows what it's doing, Travis roared. 5 minutes. The modifications were done. The beautiful, intricate device was now a monstrous, jury-rigged weapon glowing with raw power emitters aimed at the ceiling of the workshop. The serene hum had become a deep, violent thrum that vibrated through the concrete floor, a caged god straining to be unleashed. It's ready, Travis said, his hands hovering over a newly installed activation panel. Brandon came to stand behind him, placing a hand on his shoulder. He looked out the grimy workshop window at the vast, indifferent Utah sky. Somewhere up there in the cold, black vacuum, an anvil was about to fall. Eric Brandon said, "Give me a visual." Eric patched a satellite feed to the main screen. It was a simulation from NORAD, a red line arcing across the globe, its destination, a single blinking datum. Impact in 60 seconds, Eric said, his voice now a whisper. Terminal velocity achieved. It's coming. The room fell silent. The frantic energy of the past hour bled away, leaving only a profound shared stillness. They had done all they could. They stood on the shoulders of an alien giant, ready to face the wrath of their own species. On your command, Brandon, Travis said. Brandon watched the red line on the screen. He could almost hear the scream of tungsten and fire tearing through the upper atmosphere. Not yet, he said, his voice steady. Let it get close. Let him see. 45 seconds. 30 seconds. The thrumming of the device intensified the blue light within it, turning a furious, blinding white. 15 seconds. They could feel it now, a subtle shift in the air pressure, a deep subsonic tremor that was not from their machine. The anvil was coming. Brandon Eris screamed. Now Brandon Fugel commanded, his voice as cold and hard as the void. Light the fire. Travis slammed his hand down on the activator.